Hi, this is Marlene and a warm welcome from Glasgow, Scotland to all around the world. In this series of Marlene and Friends, I'll be sharing with you the most amazing group of people who have all the skills and expertise to make our world one of health and peace for all who live here, humans and non-humans alike. My fabulous guest today is Dr. Bruce Monger, a Cornell professor and oceanographer. Dr. Monger is going to share with all of us the state of our oceans, and at the rate we're going, he told me our seas could be barren by 2048. I'm seriously hoping that Dr. Monger's interview will have as big an impact on all of you as it had on me. He currently serves as a member of NASA's Ocean Biology and Biogeochemistry Science team. As an eco-activist, you'll find him out in the streets protesting with a whole bunch of his students because he truly practices what he teaches. He has the biggest class at Cornell University with nearly 1,000 students. I absolutely love him, and I know you will too. Hi, I'm Marlene Watson-Tara in Service for a Healthy World. This week I'm so delighted to welcome Dr. Bruce Monger from Cornell University. He's a Senior Research Associate in the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, and Dr. Monger currently serves as a member of NASA's Ocean Biology and Biogeochemistry Science team. Bruce, a warm welcome from snowy Scotland.
Thank you. Yeah, it's snowy here actually. I think I got some snow last night.
Fantastic.
For sure.
Okay, so we're in the same zone. We're cold, but we're cozy inside, and we're going to have a fabulous interview. Everyone around the world is in for an absolute treat today because as you share your incredible knowledge with us all, it was mind-blowing to me when I was studying on Cornell University plant-based course, and you were my teacher and professor, and your information is just amazing. Actually, I found it difficult to try and choose from 20 questions that I had prepared to ask you because, I know your courses are hugely interesting, and not only that, but they're relevant to everyone these days. No ocean, no life. So when I was listening to your lectures on the increasing threat that the oceans are under because of people's choices of diet and in part because of the population growth, I mean, it's increasing exponentially. In fact, I think a massive 50% increase in population since the 80s. So the first question I want to put to you is, Bruce, the ocean is so central to everyone's lives. So can we start with what are the several of the most serious problems with climate change, and how can we start to fix them?
Well, there's a long list of serious problems, but I sort of pared it down to a handful that I think you'll find pretty shocking. But I think sea level rise is probably one of the most talked about that we have to deal with, and the impacts of sea level rise. Coral reefs. I don't know if you know that coral reefs. We've lost almost a third of the coral reefs, and if things continue unabated and we don't change our ways, within a matter of decades, we'll lose our coral reefs. Extreme weather events, the ocean plays an important role in weather, and we all know about El Nino now and ocean's role in creating El Nino conditions. And those are expected to be altered in significant ways and produce decade-scale droughts, mass floodings, all kinds of extreme weather events. Again, tracing back in part to changes in ocean heat patterns and ocean transport patterns. And these all come back to issues of food security, if you want to bring it back to land a little bit. If we have droughts or global warming increases above the heat tolerances of the crops, then crop yields go down, and those crop yields going down in the face of rising global temperature or rising human population, we have food security issues that are becoming a major area of concern with global warming. And then we have mass human migration because of displacement from sea level rise or from drought conflicts that we're going to have to deal with. So this is a big deal. What can you do individually? Well, your website and the folks that probably frequent your website, Eat Less Meat is the easiest. There's two kinds of things that can be done, to address this problem. One is individually, and one is as a society, and I kind of break them into two. And individually, a lot of students in my Cornell courses, they're like, what can I do? And a simple one is eat less meat or eat no meat. because agricultural livestock production, there's a broad range in numbers on what its percent contribution is to overall greenhouse gas emissions. The low end is 18%, and a lot of people think that's very biased. The high end is 51% of total greenhouse gas emissions are from livestock production. So my guess, and the higher number is from a study that took the broader perspective of what goes into livestock production. That includes things like deforestation to produce the livestock areas. So my guess is that that big broad range, the actual number is closer to the high end of its contribution to greenhouse gas and not the low end. So that's a simple thing: eat less meat. Everybody can do that, and it would save a lot. Improving energy efficiency, your house, your transportation, those sorts of things are simple things that you can do. I have a big thing in my ocean class, my oceanography class, the introductory one, that I bring a lot of these topics up. A big part of it at the end is civic engagement, and I tell students, I now have told you all the things that are messed up. You are now informed. This country runs on an informed citizenry, and you have a civic duty to raise your voice. And they have to write a letter to Congress asking their representatives to act on these problems. And so you can do that, write letters to Congress, you can write editorials in your local newspapers, you can talk to your friends, but you can't sit on it. You can't just sit still with this. And so civic engagement, I think, is a really important thing. As a group, I would say, people ask me, so what do we do next? Do we do wind? Do we do solar? What do we do? And I'm like, I'm an oceanographer. I don't know. And it's a complicated thing. And I'm pretty socialist, I have to say. But in this one particular case, so I think that I'm a bit of a capitalist and magic hand of, which is put a carbon tax in place. Make the carbon, make everything that uses or emits a lot of CO2 in this manufacture cost a bit more, and everybody is going to get all crazy about, how do I make things with less carbon? How do I make things with less carbon? So they call it the magic hand of capitalism, where free markets try to figure out how do you make something cheaper. And I think if you made the cost of carbon, reflect its impacts on the environment and what it costs to clean it up, people all over the world are going to be in their basements trying to figure out how to make the most efficient of everything, to reduce our carbon. So putting a carbon tax, I think almost every climate scientist, you said, what's the number one thing that would help solve this problem? I think 100% would say a carbon tax.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. Absolutely.
So carbon tax, support a massive, and I say massive, I'm meaning like World War II scale mobilization of shifting from fossil carbon energy systems to renewables. It's a big, huge thing. It's got to be on that scale. It can't be just a few individuals putting in compact fluorescent light bulbs or LED light bulbs. It's got to be a big deal. Support that. Don't be shocked by that, because that's what we need. And then I guess lastly on this line, I just, plug Scotland, and they're, I always plug Cornell and tell students they should be very proud of Cornell's efforts to take their campus to zero carbon emissions. In Scotland, certainly, their efforts to wind energy, tidal energy, they're like,
they're right up there.
Yeah. You have a right to be very proud. I'm quite impressed. I looked up. I've heard lots and lots of times when I hear about countries that are leading, I hear Scotland it might even be the very front, Germany, but Scotland, I went on Scotland's, the government website yesterday, and they didn't give the percent at this point, but they said the equivalent amount of energy generated from renewables is equivalent to the amount of energy that every single household in Scotland uses to heat and home. So congratulations, Scotland. I hope the U.S. could catch up at some point.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was excited to read that as well, actually, because I was doing some homework on it, because they update it quite a bit, and it's fantastic. Bruce, the other thing for me is, you touched on it just briefly there about, cutting back on meat, and particularly because my work is very focused on nutritional, education and creating teachers to switch lighthouses on around the world. Exactly what you said about civic action with all your students. We're the same. Please come and learn this and go out and use your voice and share it. It's the only way change will come about. So, we've maxed out the ocean, with overfishing. We've created a major issue on coastal pollution with nutrient runoff from agriculture. Could you share with the audience why this is creating dead zones in the ocean?
Yeah, so when you talk about a coastal pollution problem, at least in the United States, and I would imagine just about every major industrialized nation has a similar problem. The number one pollution problem in the US is acknowledged to be nitrogen or nutrient pollution in general. So it's not oil, it's not some heavy metal, it's nutrient pollution is the biggest problem. And according to the Environmental Protection Agency in the US, more than half actually, of all the streams in the US are considered unfit for aquatic life, largely because of nutrient pollution. So when we talk about pollution, it's nutrients. And there's been an exponential rise in the occurrence of this nutrient pollution, and the rise has been caused by three major factors. One is globally. One is a rise in human population, so increasing population, increasing per capita consumption by developing countries as their affluence increases. People tend to shift their diets to a heavier meat-based diet. And then the change in the way that they grow livestock from the local farm that was a recycle system where manure would be spread back on crops to feed the cows that would produce manure and be spread on crops again. And now it's a throughput system. We make synthetic fertilizers from nitrogen gas in the atmosphere using a lot of fossil carbon energy to make that. We put it on the ground to grow the corn. The fertilizers leach into the streams. That corn gets shipped somewhere else into these factory livestock, CAFOs, concentrated agricultural feeding operations. Manure ponds are generated that leach millions of gallons. Ponds are leaching nitrogen compounds into the streams. And almost a third of all the nitrogen that we put out there on the ground and then move it to cows and manure, a third of it eventually gets back into the streams. And we do this year after year. New nitrogen every year on the crops to the cows. Some of it seeps into the streams. We make new nitrogen the next year, put it on the ground. So we've changed a recycle system of recycling manure back onto the corn crops or the whatever crops that feed the cows into a linear throughput system. Bob Howard's a professor here at Cornell, and he's a world expert on nitrogen. He gives guest lectures in my oceanography class, and he made a remark that was really profound to me. It really got me, probably the thing that really got me interested in nutrient pollution. He said, we have made put more nitrogen fertilizer on the ground in the last 15 years than we have since we invented fertilizer 100 years ago. So there's been this exponential increase, and with that has come increasing nutrients in our streams, and the streams flow into our coastal environment. And what happens is nutrients generate excessive amounts of phytoplankton or algae growth. Yeah. This algae grows up to high abundance, unusually high abundance. It dies, it sinks into the deep bottom waters. That's food for bacteria to consume that dead organic algae. The bacteria consume the algae in the bottom waters, and along with consuming the algae, they consume the oxygen. They draw the oxygen levels down to lower and lower levels until they're either low hypoxic conditions or no oxygen anoxic conditions, in which case nothing that breathes, which is almost everything on Earth except for some anaerobic bacteria, cannot live in those waters. So those are referred to as dead zones. They're the low oxygen or no oxygen zones. And these zones worldwide, it's not just a U.S. problem where all these streams rush into our coastal. It's a worldwide problem. Anywhere you have a lot of agriculture going on and the watersheds are emptying that agricultural system into coastal environments, you have these dead zones being created. So their numbers are increasing, and the spatial scale of them are increasing every year.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Seriously. Yeah. Sometimes you feel, you're reading a science fiction novel when you're actually teaching, right? I mean, I feel the same sometimes when Bill and I we're sharing information with our students, and we think, is this really happening, or am I making this up?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the best place to share this story, but
please do.
But I share it in almost every class. It's about climate change and sea level rise, and it gets back to this science fiction aspect sometimes. And there was a guy that came, a researcher came to my department to give a seminar This was 3 years before Superstorm Sandy hit the east coast of the United States,
Okay.
caused Manhattan to flood. Anyway,
Yeah.
this was 3 years prior. Mayor Bloomberg of New York City commissioned a study to find out what would face New York City at the end of the century with a 1 meter sea level rise at the end of the century. And this guy did this exhaustive study, and he gave a talk to our department about what the results would be. And it was, well, one meter by itself won't be a problem, but 1 meter with a storm will flood the subways. It'll do all this damage to lower Manhattan. And it's exactly what happened with Sandy. Sandy happened at high tide, which was 1 meter above what it would typically be, with a big storm surge, and everything he predicted happened with the flooding of the subways, everything. He comes back 2 years after Sandy, or 3 years after Sandy, same guy. So this is a smart guy. He predicted the consequences. And Mayor Bloomberg of New York City, former mayor, he asked for another study of what should New York City do to prepare for this. And there were a bunch of authors, and some authors of this study said, well, we need to build big seawalls. And you know what his response was, though? His suggestion? Move New York City.
Why am I not surprised? I know.
These are the things. You're in these seminars going, this is like real. These are real smart people with really clear thinking. And he follows up with, listen, it took 100 years, to build up lower Manhattan. If we stop allowing any permits for large buildings in lower Manhattan, everything new gets built on high ground. We slowly, over a 100-year period, turn lower Manhattan into park area that we allow to periodically flood. That's the most effective, efficient way to treat with this. But moving New York City, stopping, changing, it's huge. And there's more things I could get to later on, but I mean, it's not just New York City, right? It's London, it's Hong Kong, it's everywhere. And it's trillions. It's trillions of dollars worth of assets that are going to have to be moved.
It's unbelievable. It's just, as I just said, it's like reading a science fiction novel. I remember the first time the UN had reported on, pushing forward and saying the world must start to move towards a whole food plant-based diet. It's the only way forward. It really is.
Yeah.
And forget about me being an animal activist, because that's what makes me jump out of bed in the morning. For me, it's about the animals. It's just inhumane.
Yeah.
Well, one day I hope humans will look back, Bruce, and say, what? We did that to our animal kingdom? And I pray for that day to come. But the response from our mayor in London to the UN saying, well, let's all go and celebrate in Trafalgar Square and have chops and eat meat chops with the grease dripping down our face. And I'm thinking, do these people live in the same planet as me? Never mind the lack of consciousness, and I don't mean to sound self-righteous in any way, but really, so anyway, don't start me on about animal rights.
People ask why I'm vegetarian, and my number one is compassion for animals, and it's a close tie between the environment and my own health, I have to say. I think I might even put the environment above my own health, and then it's my health. So I don't know if your readers or not, but
no, I agree. Anyone in this day and age that's still pushing a meat-based diet needs to go and live in another planet. I'm sorry, apart from anything else. But it brings me to the next question, which is really, it's a great segue, because people come to me, Bruce, they're not going to change overnight. I mean, it's a fantasy that I have that the whole world believes and does what I want them to do, but it's not going to happen. So they start to gradually, come off meat, but they go to fish. And they think they're making a better choice for health, which they're not, because it's just as high in saturated fat. They think they're making a better choice from the environment, and they're not. They don't believe that fish suffer as much, but they do. Fish have pain. They have receptors in their heads and their little brains. So, can you talk just a little bit about fish farming, which mostly is what happened, is happening around the world as well. There's this fantasy and romanticism that everything's sustainably caught, and it's not. So the fish farming, for me, I've been there, and I've seen the way the fish are like tumors and all sorts of disease. So can you just touch on that for me?
Well, I can only imagine, you go to the supermarket and you see these gleaming, shining, silvery fish, but in reality, They're raised in these very, sort of confined cages, and they're bumper to bumper fish, with all their feces and everything else. So there's all these issues of disease, and antibiotics needed to be tossed in to try to keep disease at bay because all this stuff is being confined. My bigger concern, to be honest, besides the disease, is that for many fish, including things like salmon, these are carnivorous fish. They don't feed on thin air. You have to feed them something, and what you feed them is fish meal, and the fish meal comes from wild caught prey fish, forage fish they're called. So sardines, anchovies, menhaden, all these small forage fish, they are being overfished like mad today in order to feed the farmed fish we're raising along the coastline. So these forage fish are a critical central species for marine ecosystems. Large tuna eat these forage fish. Seabirds eat these forage fish. All sorts of other organisms rely on these forage fish. So they're a critical component to the marine ecosystem, and we are overfishing them. And then, before all that took place, before we really amped up aquaculture, because we've overfished the wild fish in the ocean, and we've industrialized the fishing efforts in the ocean. We've gone from these small family-owned fishing boats going out and making a living sustainably to basically factory fishing. We have factory fishing boats owned by these large corporate holding companies. They have shareholders. They have no real interest in conservation. And they've become very efficient with their industrialization of fishing my fish out of my ocean. And 90% of the best fish, so not all the fish, but the really nice, expensive fish like bluefin tuna, swordfish, 90% of those fish have been taken out of my ocean in the last several decades. So we have 10% left of what we had before. And 82% of all the major fisheries are either overfished or they're maxed out right now. So we have maxed the wild fish populations. And this attempt to turn to aquaculture is really not a reasonable solution. I will say that there are plankton, so carnivorous fish like salmon need to be fed wild-caught small fish, prey fish. Tilapia is not it's a planktivorous fish. So if you had to make a fish aquaculture-wise, a tilapia would be better than a salmon. But with that said, but we still have all the other issues of disease, eutrophication of coastal environments and such. So neither one is really great, but one is definitely worse than the other.
Well, that brings me to the next question. Can you explain to all our listeners around the world about ocean acidification?
Yeah, that's the climate people. Anyway, people that I run around with, let's put it that way, oceanographers, refer to acidification as global warming's evil twin. And as we raise CO2 and the concentrations in the atmosphere and increase the greenhouse gas effect and warm the planet, well, that CO2 increase in the atmosphere is also forcing CO2. As you raise the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, more of that CO2 then is driven by diffusion into the ocean. And the ocean's taken up about 30% of all the CO2 we've emitted since the industrial era. 30% of that CO2 has been taken up by the ocean. It's dissolved into the ocean, the surface ocean around the planet. On the one hand, that's a great thing. It's sort of staved off or slowed down the global warming that we would have otherwise had. And a lot of oceanographers are worried about whether that continues or not. Gives us that benefit of a 30% cut in our accumulation of CO2 in the atmosphere, but it comes at a cost, and that cost is that when you add CO2 to the ocean, it doesn't sit in the ocean as carbon dioxide gas. It reacts with water to form carbonic acid. And the analogy is your Coca-Cola or your Pepsi-Cola or whatever your soft drink. That acidity, that acidic bite, comes from adding CO2 gas. It's a carbonated drink. Carbon dioxide added. So you add CO2 to water, you increase the acidity of the water because it reacts with water, CO2 does. The acidity of the oceans increased by 26% since the industrial era. Carbon dioxide, acidifying the ocean causes a lot of problems with a lot of things that live in the ocean, particularly things that make calcium carbonate as part of their hard structure. Coral reefs are hard because they secrete and precipitate calcium carbonate, so they're vulnerable. to increases in acidity. There are a lot of planktonic organisms that make calcium carbonate as their protective shells. These guys are vulnerable to increases in acidification. So, and the predictions are that if we don't change our ways, within a matter of decades, not the end of the century, but 2 or 3 years, 20 or 30 years, the acidity will be high enough for essentially all of the coral reefs to be gone.
Wow.
By 2 or 3 decades. In 2 or 3 decades, the calcium carbonate of the planktonic shells in Arctic waters, the Arctic waters would be too acidic for calcium carbonate producing shells to form in Arctic. So these time scales that I was teaching this stuff 10 years ago, and it was like, well, we have to get our act together. We have to start to get our act together. And the time scales are really coming into focus now.
Yeah.
And the time scales are decades. They are 20, 30 years, or we're going to be screwed. And I tell students in my class, like, your kids, are going to be young. They're going to be young kids, and they're going to look at pictures in these books of these coral reefs, and they're going to say, Mommy, why can't we go see these coral reefs? And you're going to have to tell your kids, because we don't have them anymore, son or daughter. They're all gone in 20 or 30 years, your kids. So it's not some far off distant thing. It's like right on top of us right now.
It makes you want to get on your... It makes you want to get up and stand in your soapbox, and just shout, doesn't it? Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's the shell fishery on the west coast of the United States. I don't know about Scotland, but the oyster fisheries on the west coast, they're calcium carbonate secreting oysters.
Yep.
They're closing down some of their industry because their waters have gotten too acidic for these oysters to survive. So in some sense, some of this acidification is already on us right now, causing economic damage. And I'll just add that it's not just calcium carbonate secreting organisms like oysters and coral reefs. A lot of fish, their larvae are very sensitive to acidification. So it's the jury is still out on exactly what's going to happen to every aspect of marine food webs with increasing acidification. It's a big, big deal in oceanography these days. A huge amount of money is being spent on research trying to understand at the individual species level what's going to happen to this oyster or this coral reef or that coral reef. But there's also this big concern of what's going to happen to the whole ecosystem. How do these things reverberate through from individuals all the way through the ecosystem? So it's
I think that's where the connection. I think that's where the connection. Nobody joins the dots, do they, Bruce? They don't join the dots. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, even just like right now, sea lions. I mean, haven't they come from tens of thousands to a virtual few? Because there's no fish in the ocean left. That's their food.
Yeah.
We've taken their food away. I mean, how dare we? It's like they're non-humans, okay, but they still have a survival mechanism from we're taking their food. It's just, for me, it's just crazy,
Yeah.
I was about to ask you, to explain all the whole gravity of the problems that the planet is facing, but I think we're getting through them one at a time here. It's crazy. Sometimes I can't believe it, honestly. And I think for me, the ocean is we have to get our voices behind the ocean. We must.
I agree. And the thing is the word has to spread out, and people have to not sit on what they hear and go, wow, that's too bad. I try to figure out, one of my goals in my life is like, what's the key to turn and activate individuals that listen to this stuff instead of feeling powerless and saying, oh gosh, that's terrible, and not saying it, is like say, I'm fighting back. And, Cornell students, I say, how many of you, in the classroom, and this is the class, I have the most popular class at Cornell. I don't know if you heard that or not.
I didn't know.
So it's got 950 students in the classroom. I teach it in the concert hall.
Fantastic.
And I say to 950 students, how many of you have been accused, when you hear all this bad stuff, you have a choice. You could either fold and get small and quit, and not say anything and just accept it, or you could rise up and say, it's not going to happen on my watch. Yeah. And I go, how many of you have been accused by your friends of being overly competitive? And everybody at Cornell, all the students, they all got to Cornell because they're all super competitive. So they all raised their hand. I said, well, I, for one, am not quitting. You can feel, pushed down by all this craziness, but I'm not quitting until until I drop dead. So
Absolutely, and the people that jump out of bed in the morning with a passion and a vision and a mission, whatever, will get the job done. I mean, it is growing sort of slowly, but sometimes it's just like constantly swimming against the tide. I know that's how I feel. I don't have a lot of compadres over in this side of the world, so I do feel as if I'm always swimming against the tide. On a lighter note, one of the things that I did read and love actually, which is a very similar way I teach, you play a lot of music, which I adore, because life without music, Bruce, and I know you play Woodstock by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young a lot, which is the song that sets the tone for your lectures to, convey that we've all strayed really a long way from assembling anything that's sustainable. So that song kind of gives you the message to get back to the garden, and I love that too, because it is so true. We need to get back to ancient foods, and I have a class that I teach called Ancient Foods for Modern Cooks, because I'm teaching people about whole grains and beans and pulses and sea vegetables and land vegetables and things. So when I read that about you, I just thought it was just so fantastic. It's beautiful to use music, and sometimes it brings a simplistic message to just the sense and sensibility of what we're trying to put across. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I play another song I like playing is it's called "The Power of One."
Yeah.
And I can't remember the artist now, but it's like it was like it starts off with like one person decided to sit on the front of the bus. In U.S. history, Rosa Parks, sits on the front of the bus, creates this spark, and one small individual, if it's the right person at the right time in the right place,
of course,
can create a revolution, and
absolutely.
that's, tell the students at the start of my class, the whole purpose of this class is not, this is a weight, this is a tide, its purpose is, I want to create a revolution. And one of these students out of all those 950, I'm hoping will be the spark that does that. So.
Yeah, well, on another level, I teach a course which I created called The Natural Woman, because I do a lot of health counselling for women, and particularly menopausal stuff, and you go through life, you should go through life just naturally. So I created this 6-day retreat called The Natural Woman that women come from around the world and study and learn. And when I have my opening lecture, I play Aretha Franklin singing "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman."
Oh, yeah, perfect.
So you see, it's just all about bringing everything back to nature,
Yeah.
Bruce, can you share with me or the group, the whole audience, something fun, because we've had a lot of serious conversation here. On a lighter note, something that's been one of your funniest moments during your career. I'm sure there's been many.
I haven't quite. I thought of two stories. One that I always bring up when I talk about climate change, and particularly about ocean acidification. But I could also bring one up, so I'll bring that one up, I guess. Okay. And there's another one that's pretty hilarious as well. So I do. So I grew up in a family of five kids, and I'm the crazy one that went off and got a PhD, and all my brothers and sisters are small town, blue collar, and my older brother's a prison guard. My younger brother works in a sawmill, and so I go back for Christmas, and I'm this kind of crazy person, with all my other family, and I don't know if you know the game in Scotland, Trivial Pursuit.
Sure.
So I was playing Trivial Pursuit at Christmas, with my family, visiting my family, my brothers and sisters, and my older prison guard brother, I get a question asked, and I landed on a science question. I'm like, great. I'm like, I had every science there is, so give it to me, and he's holding the card up and he goes, what is the gas in soda that gives it its fizz or its acidity?
Sure.
And I go, oh, CO2. And he goes, wrong, carbon dioxide. And I go, but that's the same thing. C, carbon, O2 dioxide.
Oh, I love
and
he
goes, okay, but next time you got to get it exact.
Fantastic.
So there you go. Carbon
wonderful.
Dioxide, CO2.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for being an amazing scientist, for doing all the fantastic work in the world. You're out there saving the planet. You're doing unbelievable educational programs, and I'm for sure going to get this TV series, and you're going to be a huge part of being involved in that. I want to go visit the blue ocean, the blue zones in the world that you're aware of, where the people live the longest, healthiest lives on the planet without ruining nature, without using animals, you know. So it's been an absolute joy, Bruce, to share this interview with you, and I'm really grateful to you because I appreciate how busy you are, and I can't wait to meet you.
Good. Yeah, look forward to meeting you too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bruce. Take care, and thanks a million again.
All right. Take
Lots of
care.
love. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.